I just wanted to convey a picture of what our industry was like. And I think I've accomplished that.
10 o'clock at KFRC San Francisco, where we seem to be getting ever closer to.
Well, there were a couple of really exceptional things that happened. KFRC in San Francisco is top of mind because it was just an incredible experience. It's very hard to explain to people who are not in radio what that was really like or what that was about. But those of us who were there to this day say, man, can you believe we were there? KFRC San Francisco. And then there was KDAY, where I was for 17 years. KDAY was a great radio station. 1980 KDAY. I kind of bounced between formats. I mean, I did Top 40, I did R&B, did R&B oldies, did adult contemporary, did all kinds of stuff. I did middle of the road when it existed. Most people don't get to do that. Most people have not done that. So naturally, I included that in my writing. I go over getting my first job. I go over my viewpoints, a few rants, because I feel pretty strongly about some things. A lot of funny stuff. People will read the book because they're interested in the subject. And if they're not, they won't. But most people outside of our business, that is to say the radio and records business, don't know how it works. And I think they'll be fascinated. I think they'll perhaps be surprised at what goes on behind the scenes.
All right, here we are. Welcome to a very special edition of LA Radio Sessions. Joining us today is Richard Wagner.
Hello, Mike.
How are you?
I'm great.
And joining both of us today is a legend in LA radio. Now, I was going to say he's a legend in urban radio, but this man has done every type of radio there is.
And he can do anything.
And he can do anything. But 17 years at KDAY, right?
Yeah, 17 at KDAY.
So you spent a lot of time in urban radio, but you are a radio guy, the perfect interview for Richard and I, because
Right.
we love talking to radio people. And we're going to talk about your life and your career and your book, which everyone should pick up on Amazon.com, Aircheck, Life in Music Radio.
All right.
Right?
Yeah.
All right. We always begin at the beginning. You grew up, you were born in Cleveland?
I was born in Cleveland, Ohio, and raised in Cleveland, Ohio, and got into theater early on in life because my mother still has a love for theater, and my dad is a jazz musician. So the idea of a showbiz orientation was not far-fetched.
Sure.
And it was never foisted upon me. It was shown to me, and I gravitated toward it. So, and I got a chance to work when I was 10 years old. I got a chance to work with the adults, and one of the people I shared the stage with was Minnie Gentry, who was a Broadway actress. Mm-hmm. Ron O'Neill, who went on to be Superfly. People stick that on him. He did a lot more than that.
Right.
And Al Fan, who you've seen in many movies and TV shows, never had a starring role, but he was, there's Al,
Right.
And he had an acting school on Sunset for a while.
Really?
He introduced me to Kim Fields when she was a child because I was her favorite disc jockey.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So did you gravitate right to theater?
Yeah.
So you enjoyed that experience?
Oh, absolutely. I enjoyed that experience. It was my mother let a guy who was I forget what his position was, but he acted there and he had an executive position of some sort. Anyhow, his name was Bill Brown, and he wanted to take me to Cameron. Now, she had already established a booster organization for the place called the Thespians, and they would come in because sometimes they needed help, like filling the seats.
Sure. Sure.
And that was one of the things they did. They were the rah-rah group, right? But Bill wanted to take me to Carmel, and she said, okay. So she let him take me to Carmel. And shortly thereafter, I was enrolled in children's theater.
Did you think you were going to end up being an actor?
That certainly was a consideration. Here's what I knew. I knew that I would be in some form of entertainment because I was really not interested in doing a 9-to-5. I didn't care how. You know what I mean?
Well, it's something easier.
Well, you know what? Here's the thing that I think most people don't understand. I mean, there have been occasions, for example, where somebody comes up at 2:00 in the afternoon and says, "Hey, what if we And other guy says, yeah, that sounds great. And they take it to the program director and they say, oh, yeah, okay, cool. So what happens is we end up at the end of the day in the studio and we don't come out till sunrise.
Right.
We're not through till we're through.
That's right.
So you do put the work in. And
Absolutely.
I found, I mentioned it in the book. I approached Mike Payne and said, I want to be a jock on the radio. He said, okay, invited me down, took me on a tour, blah, 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 blah. We talked. I'm with Mike Payne. Yeah, all right. And then I'm sitting around, because I knew he had my phone number.
Right.
Waiting around for a month, 2 months, 3 months, no phone call. What's wrong with this guy?
Yeah.
Right? And I called him up and said, hey, Mike, I'm serious. And he said, okay, come on down.
But he needed that.
He had to have that,
Yeah.
and I didn't understand how necessary that was until later, because people will tell you that because on a whim. Oh, that sounds like a cool thing to do, and they don't understand that there is in fact work involved.
Lots of work,
right? And you have to bring certain things to perfection. I couldn't say conveniently located, and we did live copy at that. Yeah,
Right.
You know, I could say conveniently, I could say located. I couldn't say conveniently located. It would come out conveniently, some
right?
Some form of whatever that was. And I worked on that personally. I'd be walking down the street, just saying it to myself until I got it, till I could make it roll out. And that's the kind of attention to detail you have to be willing to put in.
And you had to do that in the theater as well, because you had to be able to be heard clearly by the audience.
Right, and come across as spontaneous and natural, and I just thought of this as the character.
Right.
So some of the disciplines of theater obviously transferred right over into radio.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
One of my early mentors, well, he was a mentor even if he didn't mean to be, recently died at the age of 88. His name was Reuben Silver. And Reuben, first of all, the Cleveland theater scene is second only to Broadway in terms of, its size and influence.
Right.
And we have Playhouse Square there. And Reuben's influence was such that when he passed, they dimmed the lights on Playhouse Square for him.
Oh, wow.
That's a tremendous tribute.
Sure.
And a well-deserved tribute. But I worked with Reuben for a total of 6 months, first in 61 and then again in 63 when we did A Raisin in the Sun. And I met Lorraine Hansberry. Now, in the article, they say Lorraine Hansberry didn't make it to the show, but she did make it to the show because I took my kid when he was 18. I took him to this spot. I said, this is where I stood and talked to Lorraine Hansberry when I was a kid. And I remember that. I talked to her such as an adult talks to a child, but or vice versa. But yeah.
So I want to understand this transition from acting to radio a little clearer. I'm not sure I even picked it up in the book. Suddenly, Mike Payne became a big part of your life.
Well,
right?
yes, but what happened was I had a job as a stock boy at a in South Euclid, Ohio, which was just down the street. And there was a bus stop transfer point in Cleveland Heights. Well, what happened was Ray, the guy who ran the store, gave me a couple of chances to sell.
Right.
Which I thought was really great. I mean, I was the worst salesman ever existed. I was the pits. And but the first time I called Chuck Denson, Chuck had this big voice. He had a voice bigger than his body, right? And when he was a kid. And Chuck took over the stock boy duties, and I put on a tie and didn't sell shoes. And at the end of the day, we got on the bus. We got to the transfer point in Cleveland Heights, and we're at the bus stop. And Chuck points behind us and said, "Hey, look, WCUI is there." I knew CUI was the jazz station, and because at that time we listened to everything.
Right.
Now we listened mostly in my neighborhood. We listened mostly to the R&B stations, secondarily to the top 40 stations, and every now and then you listen to the jazz station. And we did indeed have an appreciation for jazz.
Sure,
we knew the players. At any rate, he said, there's WCUY. We ought to go say hello to the disc jockey. I said, well, we can't do that. He said, yes, we can. No, we can't. He said, yes, we can. No, we can't. He said, well, come on, let's just go in. He opens the door, or I open. He must open the door. He must have, because I was, no, you can't just walk in like that.
right.
So we walked in and up the stairs, and now we're standing out in front of the door. It has a little round window, and he says,
This right outside the studio?
Right outside the studio. Yeah, because the place was tiny.
Right.
Right.
The studio was not as big as this room. Not nearly as big as this room.
Right.
Yeah.
And, this is a fair-sized room, but this is not a huge room.
Right.
At any rate, we're standing in front of the door. You go in. No, you go in. No, you go in. No, you go in. No, you go in. And the door opens, and the guy says, "Can I help you?" "Yeah, we want to see the disc jockey." "Well, you got him. Come on in." So he had us sit down, and he said, "Look, I'm on the air, and I'm on the air.
Behave yourself."
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. So we sat there and watched it, and I was fascinated because it occurred to me that whenever he spoke or rolled another record, that people were hearing that close to instantaneously,
Right.
miles and miles away. And I thought, wow, that's really something. It had never really hit me before, but that fascinated me. And I was seeing from the inside what happens as I'm listening to the radio. I'm looking from the other side of the speaker, so to speak.
Right.
And I was fascinated. So I started just coming up every week because that was on my way home. And finally, it was probably 1966, but I was still 15. My birthday's in July. So it had to be before my 16th birthday. He said, "Why don't you do this?" And I said, well, I'm only 15. He says, "You got a Social Security card?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, then you can do it."
Oh, wow.
Bing.
So you think it was that first moment in the radio station and the realization that his voice was going out to everybody that it clicked?
I think the moment was when he said, after I said, "I have a Social Security card," he said, "Then you can do this." I think that was really the moment.
Right.
Before that, it was a fascination. But it was...
You hadn't really been thinking about it much before that?
I had not
It was
thought
an
of-
entertaining thing for you to do, but you hadn't actually been thinking, "Oh, God, I want to do this. I want to do
Yeah, this is cool. I get to visit Chuck Lansing at the WCY. I get to sit there while he does his thing. That's all it was.
Wow.
But you can do this? Because it had not occurred to me.
That's funny.
Wow.
And then he said that we put together an audition tape for CUY and the sister station, which was WJMO, which was one of the R&B stations in town. And it got turned down in both places, but I'm from theater, so,
Right.
You're used to rejection.
That was good training, too. I never thought of that.
Oh, yeah. They tell you, no, okay, well, I don't like it, but...
Move on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Next.
Wow.
So, and then I sort of put it on the shelf, not out of view, but I put it on the shelf, and we were coming up on summer. It was springtime, and I heard Mike Payne on the air. I was at home, and I had him on the radio, and he said something to the effect of, "If I can ever help you, just let me know." Mike Payne was a great jock, by the way.
Was he one of your early radio heroes?
Oh, yeah. We used to listen to Mike every day after school.
Okay.
Mike, it was like, what's he going to do today?
Yeah.
And he was lively, and he was quick. He was lightning fast.
Right.
And he was funny. But he said this, "If I can do anything to help you" thing, let me know. I got right on the phone.
Not knowing what he was getting into.
Okay. So I called him up. I said, "Hey, I want to be on the radio." "Oh, okay, come on down." So I went down. It was I remember it was pouring rain. It was one of those warm Midwest spring rains. But it was like I was drenched by the time I got and it wasn't that far, from the bus stop across the street to the back door after office hours. And actually it was after 7 because the sun was still up, and the part-time guy was Leon Isaac Kennedy, and he was on the air. He was Leon Isaac. And there were 2 stations there, and I went through the first station through the door, and I found Mike. Now, I knew what Mike looked like because he had visited my high school, but he had his disc jockey stuff on.
Right.
Right.
At this point, he was wearing a suit. I'll never forget that suit. I can still remember it because it was beautiful. It was a tailor-made suit.
He was wearing a suit in the studio?
Yeah, he was wearing a suit. He was wearing a 3-piece suit. It was a dark blue, not navy, but dark blue pinstripe suit with a vest, a double-breasted vest, and a shawl collar. It was beautiful. And he was sitting in the music library, and his first words to me were, "Hey man, go to the men's room and dry yourself off." That was his first words to me. And I came out, and so he was talking to me, and to me at that time, Mike talked machine gun fast.
Right.
And I was catching every other thing or so and not quite grasping, but I didn't want to show it, so I nodded a lot. Yeah, okay, yeah, okay. And I did that a lot. And he took me around and he showed me the studio, which was state-of-the-art at the time, and showed me the rest of the place and the teletype machines and the production studio, which is where all the older equipment was, but it was sufficient, to handle what needed to be handled. And we talked and whatnot, and then he had to join some friends at a basketball game. He's going to play basketball with him, and he said, "Well, can I ride you anywhere?" I said, "Yeah, could you take me to 105th and Euclid," which was some distance, but it would have cut a lot off my travel. Right. Plus, I got to ride with Mike Payne. So we went outside. By this time, the sun had come back out, and I'm riding with Mike Payne. And he took me to the bus stop. I knew he had my number, and I got out and got on the bus and was, all right, this is cool.
Right.
I might get on the radio. Who knows?
Right.
And that's when I didn't get called for 3 months.
You didn't get called.
Right.
Yeah.
And I called him and made it clear. And he called me back, and then I stuck with it. I hung around the station for over a year before I got my first air shift.
Wow.
Yeah, and you were Jimmy O.J. then, right?
They weren't going to do Orville Johnson. They weren't going to do Orvie Johnson. That's how they knew me. That was my nickname. A lot of people still call me that, particularly family and people back home. But that's not going to work. James Johnson? No, James Johnson's not going to work. There had been a jock on Cleveland radio years before named Eddie O.J., for whom the O.J.'s are named.
Sure.
That was the temporary name they took when he was managing them, which, of course, is still their name to this day.
Right, absolutely.
And so Mike came up with, and I found out because I didn't know for certain whether it was Mike or Kurt Shaw who came up with that name. And I asked Kurt recently, actually, before the book went out, I asked Kurt. I said, which one of you guys came up with that name? He said, I can't take credit for that. Mike came up with that. Yeah. So he said, well, what if we call you Jimmy O.J.? You can call me whatever you want to call me.
Just put me on the air.
Put me on the air. I'll be Jimmy O.J., not a problem.
So from Cleveland, you were at WABQ?
That was WABQ in Cleveland, yeah.
And then at some point you left town.
I left town after I had gotten a call from Mike, who had left the station sometime before, saying he was going to KCOH in Houston, and I had to come down with him and be on the air. And 2 days later, I got a call from Wild West Dickinson, who was had taken me under his wing, and he said, "I'm here at KYOK, man. You ought to come on down." Well, KYOK, they were competing stations, and KYOK and KCOH, and well, one of them offered $125, one of them offered $110. I went with KYOK.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So you finally left Cleveland. You left home, and I guess that was that had to be a realization that now you were really in the business, right?
Yeah, it was something that I looked forward to because you don't want to. I mean, that's part of it, man. You get to see different places and have different experiences that you just aren't going to get in one place.
Right.
And so yeah, that was the I'm really in it experience, particularly when I got on the plane and the plane took off.
Yeah.
It's on.
Yeah, it's on.
What did your friends think about you being on the air? Were you kind of like a mini star?
No, because they knew me.
Oh.
And I was that part of the group personality.
Right.
And, I was the creative type. I was the star of the show and the president of the drama club in high school. And they knew I hung around WCUI, and they knew, that I, had gotten to know Mike Payne, and I hung around. It was no big deal. I didn't, I didn't carry a banner. It just came up in conversation.
But still at that age, to be on the radio.
Well, Gary Edwards had been on the radio at that age. Mike Payne had been on the radio at that age. And it was.
That's true. You mentioned that in your book.
Yeah, it was not that unusual in Cleveland. I don't think it was that unusual in a lot of other places. Right. Kids hung around WABQ and WJMO. Kids. Charlie Marcus, Billy Blackburn, and other. Well, Billy was on long before I was, but he was a kid.
Right.
So yeah, you had.
But even so, there's not a lot.
No.
So.
Not a lot.
That's still pretty special.
I don't remember in L.A. there being any kid disc jockeys.
Not kid disc jockeys, but there were some pretty young ones.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Okay, so then the one thing in Houston that struck me in your book is something that would be unheard of today, I think, is the strike.
Oh, and I put this in the book. Today I would have suggested that we take another approach to that. I would have taken a more moderate approach and I think a more helpful approach.
But I think in those times that was probably the best approach, wasn't it?
That was the first thing that came to mind. I think that if you go to management and you give them a better way and thereby bring more value to yourself, here's how you can make more money, man. Well, you're helping me make more money?
Gotcha.
Maybe we should do something to encourage you to stay around here.
Right.
You know what I mean? But what happened was we were at the end of the civil rights movement. It was pretty much, this was 2 years after King's assassination. So that was still fresh.
Sure, of course.
And our position was, I think, a righteous position.
Absolutely.
But KYOK, I'm sorry, it was a dump. It was there were very nice people there, and you got paid on time, and you got paid what they said you'd get paid. So I have no complaint with that. And
Right.
I love Dick Oppenheimer to this minute. He was our general manager, but we put the blame really at the top.
Sure.
We don't mind you making money, man, but come on. And could you invest a little bit into this? Frankly, I didn't know what I know, or I came to know shortly thereafter.
Sure.
By a year and a half, I could have gone back and advised them on how to really get something out of this thing we have here. And here's why. Here's why you want to improve this signal and make it consistent.
Right.
It wasn't consistent. It sounded one way on Wednesday and another way on Thursday.
That's never good in radio.
No.
Consistency is important.
It absolutely is.
Yeah.
Here's how to the program director. Here's how you can format it and maximize this thing and get some numbers in here.
Right.
But that's what I learned from Paul Drew and RKO. And it was simple things, but I didn't know that then. So the strike was the thing.
Okay, after Houston, you went to Chicago for a short period of time.
Yeah, I dramatically left Houston. They fired. They nailed all the troublemakers one by one, and I was one of them. But they weren't going to. I think I would have lasted because I was a kid.
Right.
But they got Wes got canned, and then when Wash got canned, Wash Allen, I walked out behind him. And I went home, and at that time I was married to Phyllis. Her maiden name is Phyllis Lynch. And I told Phyllis, I quit. What? Yeah, I quit. Okay. So I got on the phone, and I called Jack Gibson, who later became known as Jack the Rapper. And I said, Jack, I quit. He said, call me back. And he was just like this. I said, Jack, I just quit KYOK. Really? Yeah. Call me back in 3 minutes. Okay. Called him back in 3 minutes. He said, write this number down, 312, blah, 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 blah. Call Eddie Morrison at WGRT in Chicago. Tell him who you are and that I told you to call. I said, okay. So I called Eddie Morrison. And Eddie said, send me a tape. I sent him a tape. And he called me and said, how'd you like to come up and see Chicago? See how you feel about it? Yeah. So I went up to Chicago, spent a day, loved the place, and got the gig at WGRT.
Wow. Mm-hmm. How long were you there?
Only 4 months, because and I would not advise that to anyone because I think you should be any place a year, but or longer. The KFRC offer came.
That's when you got the call from Paul Drew, right?
I had already been talking to Drew in Houston. Actually, I had gone to Bill Young, who was program director of Kilt, which was a great radio station.
Yeah.
And long story short, Bill hooked me up with Paul Drew right on the spot. And so I was in touch with Drew, and when I sort of lost contact because I didn't keep sending tapes when I got to GRT.
Right.
And he arrived, and he was at Sheridan O'Hare and said, can we have dinner? Yeah, we can have dinner. Paul Drew's calling me for dinner.
Right.
Yeah.
And he said, well, you haven't been sending any tapes. Start sending tapes again. Okay. He said, yeah, you're pretty good. He said, you're not ready yet, but there's going to be something opening up here in the next few months, and, you might be right for that. Okay. So I did. And then I got the letter. It was a swing position, but it was for like 18 $18,500 a year, and this was in 1971. That was some money.
That's right.
I don't know. I know you said that you should stay a year, but I don't think you can pass up an offer from KFRC.
I could not pass up an offer from KFRC.
And at that time, KFRC was about as big as it gets, especially in the Bay Area.
Yes.
It did. You know, people to this day who are not in the business don't get it when I say there was no such thing as better.
Right.
There may have been just as good. Maybe WLS in Chicago, maybe WABC in New York, maybe KHJ in LA. Maybe just as good.
Those are the calls that would come to mind in my mind.
Right.
Yeah.
But there was no such thing as better in 1971 than KFRC in San Francisco. No such thing.
And you had the added benefit of KFRC hitting so strongly in every one of those areas.
Oh, absolutely.
You know? So unlike any other station up in San Francisco, you could be heard everywhere.
You could,
San Francisco to Sacramento.
You know, as we were, me and Phyllis had driven across country. We had gone up to Cleveland from Houston, and then going across country to San Francisco. I tuned in KFRC in Sacramento, and it came in like a local station.
Yeah.
Bob Foster was on there. Loved Foster.
And KFRC was sort of related because Paul Drew was also at KHJ at the time, right?
More significant to me was he hadn't gone to KHJ yet. More significant to me was Paul had been the program director of CKLW out of Windsor, Detroit.
Right.
And I had listened to CKLW, and I admired it. I would listen to CKLW and think, how do they do that?
Yeah.
How is that possible? How do they know that this was 10 years ago today?
Yeah.
Number one then and number one now. You know, and the top of the hour ID. I mean, I wrote about how we geeks will turn up the transitions.
Yeah.
You know,
I love that part. By the way.
Yeah. You know,
my wife just thinks I'm nuts.
Yeah. No, that differentiates us folks from the regular people that listen to radio. There's no question about that.
That's true geekdom.
Yeah, absolute geekdom. So, how long were you at KFRC, and tell us about that experience in general?
I was at KFRC, on the air at KFRC as a regular jock for close to 3 years, and then they elevated me to program director of the FM, which was automated. And Drew told me at the time, by this time he had become vice president. He had already been to KHJ.
Right.
And he had become vice president in charge of programming for RKO Radio.
Right.
And he told me, he said, you already know how to program. Now you're going to learn to be a program director. And it was under the most trying of circumstances because I had was, as I describe it in the book, an Iron Age computer, 2 part-time newsmen, a skeleton engineering crew, and a Spartan office on the 3rd floor, and pressure from L.A.
Sure.
Do this, do that, do the other. All right. You know, and it was one of those jobs that you don't like, but you're glad you had. You know what I mean? I just didn't like the job. But I am so grateful and glad that I had that job because it prepared me for things to come.
Now, that's the PD job at
KFRC FM.
The FM side. Which did you have any regrets about leaving KFRC?
Well, for a while, until I didn't show up for a shift because I crashed. Because I'd been up very early in the morning, and Michael Spears was a program director.
You were doing both.
Well, I wasn't doing both consistently, but he asked me if I would do like it was like a Friday night shift, and I didn't make it.
Right.
Well, I was never admonished for that because they knew I had been there since early morning.
Sure.
But that was the last.
Last time you were asked.
Yeah, the shift before that was my last shift on KFRC.
Did you miss being on the air, though?
Yes, absolutely I did.
Yeah.
It was way more fun than being the PD, but it wasn't as educational.
Right.
Sure.
You know, it was something that, again, I knew how to program. I didn't know how to be a program director because what happens with a program director is you got stuff coming at you all the time. You got to handle this. You got to handle that.
Sure.
And you got to make sure this. Man, wait a minute. We got to update this. Oh, the such and such needs to go on in 2 days. Well, you got to prepare that. I got to write.
I bet there was almost more pressure for that because you were doing it alone. You didn't have the support staff, and you didn't have the advisors that the other station, the AM would have had, right?
I had the advisors. I didn't have the staff.
Right.
I still had everything that they had coming out of L.A. In terms of advice. We had Harvey Mednick, who was he was just a promotional whiz, and I had Drew, of course, in programming, and this was all nuanced because the format was set. Right.
It's interesting that I didn't realize it came out of L.A. I thought it would have come from New York.
No. RKO was at it was on Sunset Boulevard. It was in the 60s. It was on Ivar and Sunset.
Okay.
Yeah.
I did not realize that. I thought it was always based out of New York.
Yeah, no, it was. While I was there, it was never in New York.
Because it was the New Yorkers that messed it up later.
Well, it may be.
Yeah. Now, KFRC, the stations you'd been with before were generally R&B stations?
Well, let me see. WABQ, KYOK. Yeah.
And so KFRC was a little bit of a departure for you.
Well, it was a departure
because it was top 40.
It was an experiential departure, but it wasn't a departure in terms of my orientation because I had been a big admirer of CKLW.
That's right.
And I listened and I paid attention to what they did, and I marveled at what they did, and I knew that I would learn something about that at KFRC because I know I'm going to run into Bill Drake. I'm going to work with Paul Drew. I'm going to be running essentially the same format. And it was all there,
right?
And it was a magical radio experience for us geeks,
right? That's right. The musical mix at that time at KFRC and at KHJ and most top 40 stations was pretty amazing as well because you got everything.
You did, and Drew was a big R&B fan,
right?
Now. At RKO, it was play the hits. There was not a lot of, give this one a break. I'm sure they did a little bit of that, but not a lot of that. It was play the hits.
Well, there were hit bounds.
They were hit bounds, but they were pretty sure that this was pretty solid.
Go.
Well, here's the thing. Radio claims to be in the vanguard. Radio is always reactive. You know what I mean?
True.
We determine we stick our finger up in the wind, determine which way the wind is blowing, then we do that and claim to be first. Right? That's what we do.
That's right.
And we make all kinds of other claims. Much more music. Much more than what? And less commercials. Less than who?
Right.
So we make all these claims. We hype.
So the FM, what musically were they playing?
Oldies.
Yeah,
and we're talking about oldies from the vantage point of 1973. So I'm talking about Little Richard.
Sure.
When we really moved up was into the Beatle era, but before that it was Little Richard and Fats Domino and I'm losing names. Jerry Lee Lewis.
Right.
Were the songs the same ones that were played on a lot of the RKO FMs back then?
Yes, right. we were K-Earth's sister station, and K-Earth at that time was automated.
Right.
Sure.
Yeah.
It was KJ FM at the time, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Up until 72.
It might. Yeah, I think they had made the transition to K-Earth by the time that I was appointed.
Right. So you learned a lot doing that experience at the FM.
Oh, yeah.
But you missed being on the air.
Oh, yeah.
Did that draw you down to L.A.?
Well, what happened was Jim Maddox called me. He was the program director of KDAY, and KDAY was tremendously successful. And they were only 6 months old. Well, less, but on his first call, they were less than 6 months old. But they were wildly successful. And, you hear things. You read the trades and you hear things.
Sure.
And he called me and he offered me a job, which I politely turned down. I was flattered to death, but I politely turned it down because, to me it was like, I'm at RKO.
And you weren't done yet.
Well, I'm an executive at RKO, and I'm in San Francisco. This is the magic city. I don't have any plans to ever live anywhere else.
How did he hear of you?
I was known. Understand, I was an anomaly being black and being on KFRC. Or being in a major top 40 station at that time. That's you get to be known in the black radio scene like, whoa, this guy is really something. Even if they've never heard you,
right?
Well, he's there. He must be great. I don't know how great I was, but I was there.
Right.
So Jim called me. I'm sure he had heard me. or he had heard an air check. I'm sure he had. I'll have to ask him.
I wouldn't think he would call otherwise.
No. I would have to be a known
But you
quantity.
had never made contact with him before?
I had not.
Wow.
And I turned him down. And I think he called me again maybe a couple of weeks, maybe a month later. I turned him down again. Very politely, very nicely.
Right.
And there was, I came to visit someone for a weekend here in L.A., and naturally I wanted to hear KDAY. And I listened to KDAY and went, oh, man, listen to this station. This day, it was a dynamite station. This was good. I was operating on RKO level. I was operating at the RKO level,
right.
And that's how I heard things. And I listened to this station. This station was great. So I went back to went back to San Francisco, and I called Jim. And all I did was call him and say, Jim, that your station is great,
right.
man. I'm just calling to tell you that. And that was that. So I started thinking about it. And it came down to, you know what? I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this, and I've gotten this offer from L.A. I don't really want to leave San Francisco, but it is L.A.
Yeah.
And finally, I just made up my mind. That's what I'm going to do. So I called Jim and I said, look, I don't know if you guys are still interested in my being on the air at KDAY. I said, but I'm quitting here tomorrow, one way or another. So he said, well, call me back tomorrow. I said, okay, but I told him I'm going to do it anyway. And I did. And I called him. And Drew, no. I called Jim before I was going to quit anyway, but I called Jim and said, well, what's up? He says, well, no, come on. You got the job.
Wow.
If you want it. I said, okay, good. I got to give him 2 weeks notice. I called Drew and I wrote it down, of course. I put it in writing, but I also called him because I wanted him to hear it. He congratulated me and didn't require 2 weeks. And and he told me that KDAY was a great radio station, and Drew was not one to heap praise.
Right.
He didn't heap just to be polite or just to be encouraging. He meant that.
Yeah.
And so I felt good about that. And of course, I might add, me and Drew were cool to the very end.
Yeah.
We were. I mean, I used to go to his house for dinner and stuff like that.
He sounds like he was a big influence on a lot of your thinking as far as the way radio should be.
Huge. Major.
Little things, like one of the things you mentioned was don't give the score of a baseball game that's in progress because
Right.
you don't want to have them tune away.
Exactly.
And that's a lost art now. People don't think that way anymore.
No, they don't think that way anymore. How do you deliver the call letters?
Yeah.
The call letters are the call letters, but how do you say them? You don't
Right.
say KFRC. You say KFRC.
Yeah.
Now, you can say it big, you can say it mellow, you can say it in all kinds of ways, but it's KFRC. It's not KFRC.
Right.
And when I was program director of KDAY, I'd tell them, hit the consonant sound of that K to make it pop.
Yeah.
It's 1580, KDAY.
Now, Paul, I think you pointed out a couple of times in the book, was not always gentle in his means in terms of getting across programming tips to his disc jockeys.
When the honeymoon was over, the honeymoon was over. Drew, let me explain something. Drew liked me a lot. I know he liked me a lot because I know what he did for me.
Right.
And I know what our relationship was for decades thereafter. I know he liked me a lot, but Drew didn't give any quarter. You're here to do this, and you're going to do this, and you're going to do it at this level every time. I don't care. And I don't want to hear anything else. I don't care who you are.
That's right.
And we had the engineer who was in front of us through the glass, and above the glass was a red light. And it had this tick. Now, you couldn't hear it on the air, but it would tick, tick, tick. And that thing would go off, and you go, oh, God, what's this going to be?
It was a hotline.
It was the hotline. And you answered immediately. Hello. Did you read the memo about the such and such promotion? Yeah, I read it. Okay. Well, I'll tell you what. After your next break, I want you to go back and look at that memo again with particular attention to the third page and the second paragraph. Well, all right. I'll call you back in a little bit. Click! Oh, you just hung up on me rudely, and I'd be just beside me. Oh. And then I'd do the back sale, go into the stop, and come out of the stop and give the guy the next song. run back to the back, read the memo. There it was, something I had violated. So he was right, which made it even worse.
Yeah, right.
And then I went back on the air. Now, I wasn't going to repeat the action that had prompted the call for another, at that point, maybe 45 minutes.
Sure.
He would call back and he would say, did you read the memo? Yeah, I read the memo. Good, because I don't want to hear that horse crap on this station ever again.
That's funny.
Click! Oh, man, now I'm sitting there seething. I know I'm wrong, but
Right.
I'm so mad at his manner.
Right.
And then you sit there and you go through it, and you do the promotion, the contest the right way, to a T. And here comes the light again, tick tick. And, oh man, okay. You pick it up, hello, and he would praise you. He'd say, "Hey, I was listening. That was great. That's the way you do it. I just wanted you to know that you're sounding good. Keep it up." So
He'd dish out the praise as well.
he would dish out the praise, but here's the funny thing. This is after I had nurtured this mad for an hour.
Yeah.
And now he calls me up and praises me, and I got to give up the mad.
Some would argue that that's not that wouldn't be the right approach to someone on the air to shake them up.
Let me tell you something. It worked.
It worked.
It worked, and by the way, no one was immune to that.
Right.
It didn't matter who you were under Drew.
Right.
You did it per instruction, and that was that. Now he encouraged personality. He encouraged you to be as much you as the format would permit. So you had this format. Let's say that this room is the format. I could bounce off the walls and the ceiling all day long, but I had to stay within these bounds.
Yeah, and all of the stations that he looked over, that was sort of the mantra, right?
It was.
Yeah.
And I guess as a follow-up to what you're asking, you wouldn't be on the station if you couldn't handle things.
No.
Because you had to be professional. You had to be ready for almost anything.
You absolutely had to. The show must go on.
Yeah, it's almost like having a heckler in the background of a live performance.
You got to handle him, and you got to handle him in a way that makes you look good.
Right.
So you don't, you only rip him so far.
Right.
But you got to handle him. But Drew, that's the way he. And by the way, Drew had big admiration from his staff, huge admiration from his staff. And
he probably also saw the potential that others didn't see.
I'm sure.
If you demand if you have high expectations, you have to work with the people to get those.
Absolutely, and he respected those people. He did have respect for us.
And it sounds like you did the same thing when you were a programmer.
Yes, I did, because I know what.
So were you as abrupt?
Let me put it this way: I didn't try to be Paul, but I sure picked up a few things from Paul.
There you go. Before we leave the KFRC experience, we can't leave that without talking a little bit about Bill Drake, because he was part of that formula as well, right?
Yeah.
Well, did you have a lot of dealings with Bill Drake?
Yeah, I did. Now, I didn't have dealings insofar in the same way that, say, Drew did.
Sure,
he was a program director.
Right.
But Drake hung with jocks. He was a jock.
Yeah,
and he hung out socially with jocks, and he talked to jocks, and he would listen. He was a good listener. He wanted to know what you thought.
Right.
And I met him. I think. I met him just after my 21st birthday. I got to KFRC just before my 21st birthday, and I met him shortly thereafter. I knew I would meet him. And I met him and shook hands, friendly guy, big smile. And this was the voice I had listened to for years at the top of the hour. Ladies and gentlemen, the beat goes on.
Oh, that's right.
And I had always admired that about him, and I admired the work that he did as consultant because I knew he was the consultant to CKLW and KFRC, and this thing that he had put together, man, it was magic, and it was very, very successful. So he was huge in my universe, and I met him, and then there was a little bar. San Francisco's is honeycombed with little alleys, and they've got all kinds of interesting things in the alleys. And around the corner from us was a little Korean bar called Hanil. And I remember sitting there with Drake shortly after I met him, probably the same day, sitting at the bar, drinking, and he could drink, and sitting at the bar drinking with Drake. at the age of 21, sitting there with Bill Drake playing Liar's Dice and talking radio. And it was like, you're sitting there and you're thinking, I am sitting in a bar in San Francisco working on KFRC. I'm at this bar with Bill Drake talking radio, and he's listening to me.
Right. How good is that?
It doesn't get better than that.
Now, the one thing about the Drake formats everywhere, and you talked about how you were given the big room to work within as long as you stayed within the room. The one thing that we hear from jocks that have worked that format is that if you came in and you had a bad day, because of that format, it still made you still could do a good show because the format made you do a good show.
Exactly. Do the format.
Right.
Drew could be brutal because you either had not been efficient enough to read the whole memo.
Right.
Or because you were lollygagging. And he could hear it. Program directors can hear that. He could also hear when you're just having a bad night or a bad shift.
Sure.
And he wouldn't get on your case. The advice was usually just do the format. Don't reach. Just do the format. Nobody's going to notice that you're not brilliant today.
Because the format's brilliant.
Right. And if you do that, and if something just happens to hit you, go ahead. But don't reach.
Yeah. Let's move on to KDAY, because that's where you spent the bulk of your career at KDAY, pretty much.
Well, 17 years. It depends on whether you consider that I'm a radio guy today. That would have been close to half at this point.
That's right.
Yeah. But it was by the end of the 17 years, it was well over. It was the bulk.
And KDAY had just been a kind of an AOR format.
Oh, it was straight up AOR.
Right before you got there, right?
Well, I got there 6 months into the R&B format.
Right.
So some time had passed, and it had time to, I'm given to understand that it was an instant hit.
Yeah, it was.
By the time I got there, man, it was like.
Well, there was no other AM station like that, right?
Well,
I don't even know about
there was KJFJ.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
And
KTFJ.
And KJFJ was not a bad station.
Right.
But KDAY was the whole staff, except for Tom Reed, were top 40 jocks. Mm-hmm. All of us. Don Mack in the morning, Steve Woods in the afternoon, Jim Maddox in the early midday,
sure.
And Gene West, who I broke in on the all night shift with at KFRC, was on the all night shift at KDAY at that time. So it was all top 40 guys.
You think that made the difference?
I do, because there was a certain refinement to it.
Energy level.
It was a certain energy level and refinement, and the emphasis was music. That's what they're there. That's what they come for. They're coming for music. I don't care. One of the things that I used to tell my jocks would be, because I would say, if you go beyond 10 seconds in a back cell, you better have something awfully compelling to say. And usually they didn't. And what I would tell them was, nobody cares what you think. They think they care what you think. And if you keep it brief, they'll think you're brilliant.
Yeah.
Right.
So just keep it brief. They're there for music. They're not there to know what you think.
Wow. So you started out just as a jock there, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you moved on to become the program director.
Yeah, in 1977, Jim got an offer to work KMJQ in Houston, Magic in Houston. And he and Gary Price, our general manager, had both concluded that I was the best guy to be the program director. And to this day, I think I was, because of my background and experience and my programming sense. And
is that hard to transition when you're a jock and you're working with these people and now all of a sudden you're in charge of them?
In the first few days, I think, yeah. Because now for me it was.
Okay.
It's look, somebody got to run this thing.
Right.
And you're a professional and I'm a professional. When we're not in this environment, when we're outside of this station, we're equals.
Right.
I'm not, we're equals.
Right.
But when we're here, I'm the guy in charge. That doesn't mean I'm going to lord over you, or it doesn't mean that you don't have any input. Of course not. I'm not stupid. You can have input because I don't know everything. And I would tell them that in a minute. I don't know everything.
How long before you installed a hotline?
Oh, the hotline was there. The hotline was there, and the hotline would get used. But I was
So everyone was used to that.
Yeah, I was.
Yeah, if they were in top 40 radio,
That's
they
true.
had to have
That's
been
true.
used to it already.
I was not as generally as harsh as Drew. Now, there was one kid. He was the most talented person I ever hired. His name was Doug Banks, and Doug went on to become a millionaire in Chicago, but and in syndication. But Doug was a kid. He was 19 years old, and he was just talented beyond belief. Now, I had Doug on one end of the age spectrum, and I had Don Tracy on the other end, who at that time was about 37. So we had a 19-year-old and a 37-year-old, and I was in the middle. And if Tracy breached the format or was having a bad day, if anybody's having a bad day, I would treat it as such. But if he breached the format for some reason, I would consider it's probably an honest mistake, and I'll approach it as such. Doug, on the other hand, I could hear him lollygag.
Yeah.
I knew he was on the phone or doing something. Somebody was in the studio with him. There was something going on, and his talent was monumental. But with Tracy, I would massage. Hey, man, how you doing? I don't know. Yeah, I understand. Tell you what, just pull back into the format. Is it that bad? Well, it kind of is, but it'll be all right. Because he was usually very, very consistent.
Sure.
Right.
Doug, on the other hand, hey, Doug. Hey, JJ. Do you realize you just stepped on 3 vocals in the past 40 minutes? I did? Yeah, Doug, you did. But I'll tell you what,
And jocks know when they do that. But.
Of course they know. Of all the things you know, it's I stepped on the vocal.
Yeah.
And so when he came with I did, it's like, oh, man, eye roll, right, on my part. I said, yeah, you did. And this was a thing Drew did to me. I said, I'll tell you what, man, you step on one more vocal. I don't mean tonight. I mean if you step on one more vocal, period, I will stop whatever I'm doing, leave wherever I happen to be, drive to the station, sit next to you, and direct you set by set. And I'm not going to like that, and you're not going to like it. Do we understand each other? Yeah. Click.
I will say this because I have worked with Doug, and he's got the impersonation down good.
That's funny.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's who he was. And you know how great he was.
Yeah, he is great.
Yeah.
He is great.
Now, here's a weird question. This is kind of a stupid question from a radio fan, but did programmers ever go into the studio to talk, or was it always on the hotline?
No, I would walk in, and Drew would walk in.
Okay.
Every PD I knew
The call
would walk
was
in.
mainly when they're away from the station.
Oh, yeah. If they could be at lunch. They could be down the street.
What was worse for the jock?
The hotline was.
Okay.
The hotline was, for me, it was the worst. You know, just
Because if they're taking their time to call, it must be bad.
Well, yeah, you just did something, and it's ominous light goes off. Oh man, what am I going to go through now? This time.
Yeah. We've interviewed a lot of LA jocks, and we haven't talked about Martonis too much with the other jocks. But that was the radio record hangout. Was it not?
Martoni's was the place.
Yeah.
Everybody went through Martoni's. Martoni's, you would look up and there'd be somebody famous, but you didn't make a big deal about it because this was an everyday occurrence.
Right.
I mean, you know, I had encounters and lunch or drinks with all kinds of people, from James Brown to Mary Clayton to Jackie DeShannon and Earl Palmer, the famous studio drummer, and on and on and on and on. Members of the White House, the Nixon White House, the infamous Nixon White House. A couple of them came through, and they were friendly guys.
Wow.
Connie Chung and what was. Oh, good. I'm doing what you were doing earlier. There were too many to remember.
And a lot of radio people as well.
Radio people.
The KHJ jocks hung out there too, right?
Yeah. We used to sit there, and it was a gathering spot. So you would sit there not just with your guys, but you would sit there with guys from other music formats, and I'm talking about contemporary music formats. And when Morgan would walk in, it was like, well, here comes God, right? I mean, it would intimidate everybody, you know. But we would sit there. I remember for years there was a round table there just before you hit the archway into the dining room. And depending upon the year, on Thursday or Friday, we would sit at the round table. Bruce Vidal, who was one of the greatest radio personalities I've ever heard, and a sweet guy. He was a great guy. I loved Bruce. Bruce would be there. Bruce was kind of the unofficial chairman of that particular board.
That's funny.
He didn't make himself that. He just sort of was.
Yeah.
But there would be a bunch of us, and we'd gather there and we'd drink and talk stuff. There was never any real point to it except being with your buddies and talking radio and chicks and,
Well, you bring up Martoni's in the book, and like I said, we've had other people on who obviously had spent time at Martoni's, but you did bring it up in the book, and the book is Aircheck Life and Music Radio. It's available at Amazon.com in a Kindle version. J.J. Johnson impersonator.
Oh.
Tell me about that.
I was at KDAY, and I got a call from Bo Weaver, who today is one of the big, probably top 10 voiceover guy in America, and has been for some time. And there was Kevin McCarthy, and they were both in Dallas at that time. We had already worked at KFRC together.
Right.
Got a call. I can't remember who I talked to first, but they called me and said, JJ, how you doing? Fine. Nice hearing from you guys. Is everything going well at KDAY? Everything is great. Why? Well, you haven't grown any taller or darker, have you? No, I haven't. I'm being, what's going on here? I said, nah, I'm still the same short guy and, about the same complexion. Why? He said, well, this guy had come in and he had called one of them and said, hey, this is JJ. Hey, JJ. Yeah, man. I got fired from KDAY and, I'm looking for a gig. And I'm here in Dallas, and I was just wondering if you could help me out. Well, hey, come on down. And naturally, it was, well, come on down. Let's talk about it. Because these are friends of mine. Let's see. You know how it is. Let's see what we can do about this. So he showed up, and I can only imagine their faces when he came through the door. Because obviously it wasn't me. But he was playing me. He wasn't saying my name is J.J. Johnson. He's saying I am that guy.
Yeah.
And he's talking to people I know and have worked with. And, he didn't understand how small the radio community really is.
That is hilarious.
He didn't know that you knew them?
He didn't know.
I just love that story. I had to have you share it.
Well, the thing was, here's the thing about it, was that I was amused by it, more amused than annoyed. And that was fine until another guy who was committing crimes I mean, really, really bad crimes, was claiming to be me in Venice. He was hanging out in Venice, and I hung out in Venice from time to time.
Yeah.
He was claiming to be J.J. Johnson from KDAY.
Oh, no.
And and I found out a couple of weeks after the fact that a young woman, pretty girl that I knew, had ended up in the car with him. And he claimed to be me. Well, she knew something's wrong here.
Right.
And at the stoplight, she got out the car.
Yeah.
Goodbye. But the cops followed me up into the parking lot one Saturday morning. And fortunately, I had been out with Doug Banks, who was at KFI by that time, and my dear friend, good grief, Ted McQuiston. We were going to see Star Wars, Return of the Empire Strikes Back.
Right.
And so I could account for my whereabouts. No cell phones.
Right.
Sure,
of course. Different times.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I'm with two guys, and I was with them until we took Doug to the station after the movie, and then I went to Ted's apartment. I sat there and crashed.
Right.
And when I woke up, it was like midnight, and he had gone. He was in his room, so I just kind of split and went home and slept. Got up a few hours later and headed out to KDAY. So I'm going up the hill, and the lanes were one way going up and another way coming down. And there's a garbage truck there. Can't get through past the garbage truck. I got 10 minutes to go. So I backed down the hill, drove around Glendale Boulevard, and came up the one-way lane the wrong way to go into the driveway. Cops followed me up, and I'm thinking I'm going to get a ticket.
Yeah, for driving the wrong way.
Driving the wrong way. So I parked my car in front of the door and sat there and nobody came. So I said, okay, fine. So I went on the air, plugged in, and after the first record, Octavio, who was our security guard, came down and said, "Cops want to talk to you." And I'm thinking, oh, great, I'm in the studio and I'm going to get a ticket. So they came down and they had this uneasy look on their faces. And they said, "Are you J.J. Johnson?" I said, "Yeah." And they said, I forget what all they said, but they were looking at me strangely, and I'm looking at them. And well, could you tell us what you were doing last night? I said, "I went to the movies." So I saw the Empire Strikes Back. I was with a guy named Ted McQuiston and Doug Banks from KFI. Okay. Could we talk to you? I said, sure. It turns out that some guy had claimed to be me and had committed a series of rapes.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah, my stomach dropped.
Yeah, that's different than the first guy.
That's way different. And I made up my mind then that no more impersonations. Now, nobody has since, but I made up my mind, okay, now it's not funny anymore.
Right.
It's not amusing.
Let's talk about the music at KDAY. It went through a lot of changes over the time you were there. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about how the music evolved at KDAY from when you started to when you left.
Well, it was always an R&B station.
Right.
And we always played R&B. But we went through the disco phase, which to me is a form of R&B.
Sure.
And that was the thing to do. I mean, if we hadn't, we'd have been out of step.
Sure.
We went through that, Donna Summer and Casey and the Sunshine Band and all of that. And then in 1979, I had been program director for a year and a half, 2 years, and I stepped down. Me and Gary disagreed. There was no animus, but we disagreed. I said, you know what? I'll just go back to being a jock. And he installed Steve Woods. In 79, he heard Sugar Hill Gang, and he put it on air. And
in with the
in the rotation.
Okay.
And I thought kiddie music, and we played some more rap. And I'm thinking kiddie music, and then Gary Price. And we'd really annoy Woods because Gary would refer to it as kiddie bang bang music. Well, understand, I was listening with a 30-year-old ear, and I'd come up through the rock and roll generation. I was hip to jazz, and I was into the early rock, which was a little different from rock and roll. We're talking about Al Cooper and Santana, early Santana, and Inagata-DeVita was on everybody's radio.
Right.
So to me, legitimate music, legitimate contemporary music was jazz, rock, blues, R&B, and that was pretty much it. And so here comes this rap thing, and I didn't take it seriously. But Steve did, and he had the insight to see the future. So what ended up happening was we became known as America's rap station. That wasn't entirely true because we were always an R&B station, but we had a certain emphasis on rap. And then when Greg Mack came, who's now on good grief, what's smooth used to be smooth jazz. What?
On the Wave?
Yeah, he's on the Wave.
Yeah.
But Mack came in, he brought another sensibility because Mack is about a half generation removed from me. And he saw the future. And as music director, he increased the rap content. And when I didn't always agree because there was gangster rap in there, and I never agreed with that. But we did that, and it worked for us.
Did you warm up to the hip-hop and the rap at all?
There was always some that I liked.
Yeah.
I particularly liked Public Enemy, but I like the Will Smith kind of stuff. And, and I like the humor of Curtis Blow. And I liked Kool Moe Dee, but Kool Moe Dee was my introduction to gangster rap. Now, Kool Moe Dee, and I got hooted down when I spoke to a group at UCLA about this. I said, listen, I love Wild Wild West, but it's about gangbanging. I said, at that time, I'm 39. I know it's just a song. What does this do to a 14-year-old? Yeah. And I'm really concerned about how a 14-year-old takes that.
Sure.
Because what we have is a bad message appended to a really cool track and a good sound.
Right.
And that can have an impact. And as far as I'm concerned, it did, because I think that the gang problems that we've had were directly connected to that. And that doesn't mean that they weren't that there was not some great creative stuff that came out of there. Because I think to this day, I think "Gangsta Gangsta" by NWA is a great piece.
Right.
But again, I'm an adult and I can hear it.
Sure. Absolutely.
So then that's my problem with it was kids. You know.
Right. Well, KDAY was looked at as one of the, premier rap stations. There's no question about it. At the
It
time.
was. But you know what? The last interview I did was with the OJs.
Is that right?
It was. Now, let me just say this about that. When I knew that we were going to go away, because Heritage owned this company, this radio station by then, and they were great people.
Right.
So they kept us surprised. We're going to sell it and blah, blah, blah. We worked everything out with the union and everything. And so they were cool. But I had this secret wish. It was my wish. I never voiced it to anyone. I would like to do one more interview with the OJs, because the two greatest interviews I did a lot of, when I say great interviews, I'm talking about interviewees.
Sure.
And I really dug everybody that I interviewed.
Right.
But the most special ones were the Pointer Sisters and the OJs, because those just popped,
Yeah.
and they would just rolled with it. And so I thought, because of, it was kind of what I call just a kind of a poetic ending, if I could interview the OJs one more time, because we always have such a great time.
Well, Eddie Levert is one of the funnest guys in the world to speak to,
absolutely
interview
was.
or otherwise.
Oh yeah, and we would poke at each other.
Right.
We had a great time.
Yeah.
And but I never voiced it. And Jack Patterson, my program director, came to me one day and said, "How'd you like to interview the OJs?" Yes. And I got to do my OJ's interview, and that was the last interview I did. And I usually was the guy who interviewed people.
Sure.
I did my last interview with the OJ's on KDAY, and a couple weeks later I signed it off, and that was just great. And our engineering trainee, we call him Sporty. Sporty says, "Man, I could hardly tell who was the jock and who was the act."
Yeah.
And I kind of took that as a compliment because it just melded together so well.
Now, you got to work with Lee Marshall at KDAY.
Oh, Lee Marshall. Yeah, with those pipes.
Yes.
King News.
Yeah, and he was a good guy too. He was just a wonderful man. He really was. RKO alumnus. So many of us were.
Right.
And yeah, we related. I'm glad that there's a thing on YouTube on 2020 News, and Lee is part of that.
Right.
And you get to hear him sort of do the thing. But he did that on KDAY. I don't know where the King News thing came from, but because he was Lee Marshall, and then all of a sudden he was King News.
Was
Right.
Lee Marshall on KDAY ever, or was?
Yeah.
He always, okay.
He was Lee Marshall before the King News thing came.
Okay.
I don't know where that came from. It was probably.
Did we ask him about that?
I don't remember.
I don't remember asking. I was
thought it
under
was
the
King News all the time.
I thought he was King News all the time as well. But he did talk about the fact that people thought he was black.
You know what? I guess so. Because I worked up close with the everybody. First of all, it didn't matter.
Right, of course.
If you were doing the format, if you could
Right.
fall in with this and make this thing flow, then
Absolutely.
welcome to the club.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, okay, I could see how they might think that.
yeah. Well, that's what he told us.
Maybe he thought that.
Well, understand that our listeners were used to that sound,
Sure.
and they were used to people like me. So
Yeah.
here I'm showing up. I'm black.
course.
Right.
So
That's right.
that fell right in.
Let's talk about some. We've touched on some of the artists that you've been in contact with and interviewed, and you spotlight some of them in the book. But I'm just going to throw these names out and have you talk a little bit about them. Jackie Wilson.
Oh, man, that was a magic moment. And when I was 9 years old, I became aware of Jackie Wilson because of Lonely Teardrops and his appearance on the Ed Sullivan Show. And he became one of my favorites right off the bat. And I just thought Jackie Wilson is magic. It's funny you should bring up Jackie Wilson because I was watching him on YouTube last night and thinking, wow, look at this guy. And I'm looking at him 50 years later, and he's still great even as I look back at him. But he was appearing at the Allen Theater in Cleveland, and I wanted to see Jackie Wilson. And I was always up for going to shows by myself. And by this time I was on the air, so I could work my way into these places.
Sure.
It wasn't computerized at that time. So I got to the theater, and I got tickets to that one. I got a ticket to that one. So I went in, and when I got there, I told somebody at the stage, at the edge of the stage, I told him, I'm Jimmy O.J. from WABQ. I'd like to see Jackie Wilson. So they went back there, and they came and got me and took me up the stairs, and I knocked on the door, and he opened it, and he said, "Hey, come on in." He was a very friendly guy. But I must say he was one of the most charming men I've ever met.
Really?
This guy would charm you. So we sat there. We must have talked for about 15 minutes, and somebody came to the door and said, "Jackie, there's some people downstairs, and you got to get ready because we're getting close." And so I walked downstairs with him, and he met some people at the stage door who wanted to meet him. And there was a group. There's been about 4 or 5 people. And he took time with each individual and kissed hands and shook hands and chatted and complimented and whatnot. And I thought, wow, this is a master at work. And then I said, when he was through with that, I said, "Well, sure is nice meeting you." He said, "Well, it's nice meeting you." And he went upstairs, and I went out and sat in the audience, and he put on a Jackie Wilson show. And then he called me when I was in Houston. I didn't meet up with him. I was supposed to, and so that didn't go well. I never hooked up with him, but I wasn't mad at him for it. But I was just thrilled that I met Jackie Wilson.
Yeah. We'll go to a sort of a different extreme. George Clinton.
George used to hang around KDAY. It was not unusual for me to show up to work and run into George in the hallway. And the George that I can't say I know George. I was acquainted with George.
Right.
And the George I was acquainted with was the George on the records. He was really like that. And, God, I mean, George had it going on, man. I mean, the joke in the business was that he said he's got groups signed to all these various labels, and they're the same group.
Right.
That was the joke. It wasn't entirely true, but it was almost true because of their close associations. He had Boots's Rubber Band and the Horny Horns and Parlette and what have you. And he knew how to take all these disparate elements and make them work. Because if you listen to the stuff, you'll hear Bernie Worrell doing classical riffs. Yeah. Acoustic piano riffs on top of all that's going on underneath him. Yeah. I went to a sound check once for Parliament at the Forum. The sound, it was like going to a performance, man, minus the lights and minus George, but just to sit there and watch them. And they would just spontaneously start this groove and just go. And it was just it was a magical thing.
Yeah, they were one of the original jam bands, if there ever was, an R&B jam band.
Yeah.
Mr. Brown.
James Brown. I became aware of him in '62 when he came out with actually Prisoner of Love was on an album, and our next door neighbor turned me on to him. And I thought there's something special about this guy. I wasn't quite sure what, but the following summer, WJMO at night would play James Brown live at the Apollo, which had been recorded in October of the previous year. And this was like, we'd be glued to the radio when this thing would come on. And the thing was, they would just wild track it because it was one long track on each side. And that to this day, I consider that that's the greatest live album ever made. And a lot of people agree with me on that, including Rolling Stone.
Yep.
And so fast forward, 1966, he appeared at Cleveland Arena. I went by myself. It was in the afternoon. And it was unbelievable, this performance. It was like beyond description. Yep. And it was a spectacle is what it was, with him at the center of it.
Right.
And it was the fire marshal turned on the lights, and the people went crazy, and he threw a cufflink out there, and the crowd would jump and throw a tie in the other direction and then jump, and it was just unbelievable. And then I saw him at Sam Houston Coliseum in September, I think, of '69. I think it was September. And same thing as in Cleveland Arena, different show. He never put on the same show twice.
Right.
It wasn't computerized. Yeah. A lot of the same songs, but it was its own show.
Sure.
And that's when I met him. And I've got that picture posted on my book page, my aircheck page on Facebook. But it's me and him and Wild West Dickinson. And I met him, and I was acquainted with him ever since. I say acquainted because we weren't tight buddies. We didn't go hanging out.
Sure.
I did have lunch with him at Martoni's once.
There you go.
But he would get in touch with people, and if on the occasions when I'd see him, it was always come on in.
Right.
It was always like that, and we would chat. Never deep, but we would chat, and I was always in awe because I'm with James Brown.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, people say, who's the greatest entertainer you ever saw? James Brown. Not Michael Jackson. No, Michael Jackson was extraordinary.
Yeah.
James Brown was great.
Yeah. We're going to wrap this up, but I wanted to cover one more thing. Working at KDAY,
Mm-hmm.
we had a riot during the time you were at KDAY.
No, I was at KJLH by that time.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right. So you were
Great station.
Another great station, Stevie Wonder's station, right? How was it to work in that environment during that sort of
That was a
situation?
Oh, it was a trip. First of all, the verdict came down in the Rodney King case. And shortly after the verdict came down, I mean, you could feel it in the air. You could feel it all over town. I was in Sherman Oaks. I could feel it there. I could feel it in the grocery store. And I got a call saying, could you please come in to the station like right now? I said, okay.
Where were the studios?
On Crenshaw, it would be like at 37th. Or if you go to Angela's Funeral Home, it was across the parking lot from Angela's because it was owned at one time by John Lamar Hill, hence JLH, John Lamar Hill.
Okay.
And then the station was right across the parking lot in another building. But I arrived at the station rather, and because I wasn't scheduled to be there at that time, and 3 or 4 of the staff were hanging out on the front steps, just a couple little steps down from the front door. And George Moore was one of them, and there was Crenshaw's very wide at that point. It's like the equivalent of like 12 lanes wide.
Right.
And across the street, there's a liquor store, and people had torn down the grating, and they were running in and running out with arms full of stuff. I said, man, how long has this been going on? He says, for a couple hours. I said, where are the cops? No cops. No cops? No cops. Okay, well, I guess it's on now. And we got our marching orders, which amounted to work the phones. On the air, let the people vent. And we did play music, but it was sort of as an interlude, and we tried to play stuff that related, and things that were not that wouldn't add fuel to the fire. And I think a lot of broadcast entities in L.A., not all, but a lot, added fuel to the fire by taking positions. Oh, look at these people! This is terrible. Not a good thing to say at this time. Man.
No.
What you need to do is be quiet, or just say what you know,
Right.
and just leave that because that doesn't mean that we certainly never went along with the program. No, it's not all right to riot. I, recall talking to a couple of people, and one of them went along the lines of, okay, so you rioted. Yeah, well, I'm mad. I said, yeah, well, we are too. But do you think it's all right to burn somebody's place down or loot their property? Well, you don't understand. The Rodney King thing wasn't right. Agreed. Now, is it all right to loot somebody's property, steal their stuff, and or burn down their place? Is that okay? Well, pause. Hey, man, I understand. Tell you what, from this point forward, you do what you know is right, and thank you for calling. But the point was, no, it's not all right.
Did you feel like you were maybe making a difference in the situation a little bit?
I can't measure it, of course, but I do think so. I think at least marginally we made a difference. We got a Peabody Award for it. So I can't help but feel that we made at least a marginal difference. I can tell you that people listened, and I can tell you that there was one night, and I'm not anti-cop. I don't want that to come across as anti-cop. But there was I was on the air. We had a Looking Glass studio right there at sidewalk level. And one night I'm on the phone talking to the guy, probably the second night I'm on the phone talking to a guy on the phone, a listener. And I look up and there's this flashlight. It's a cop flashing a light at me, like one of those cease and desist kind of motions, right? Go away. Well, I'm sitting in a studio with radio equipment around me, a boom microphone in front of my face, headset on, and outside, if you look over there, there's a sign that says KJLH. Now, anybody, the average person would have gotten it.
Yeah.
Obviously, I'm on the air here.
Yeah.
So I told the guy on the phone, I said, hold on just a moment. I said, there's a police officer in front of my window at this moment shining a light in here as if to tell me to cease what I'm doing. I don't know what he expects. I don't know if he expects me to sign the station off or what. Anyhow, I went back and I started talking to the guy, and the cop went away, and that was the end of that. I think somebody on the police force heard that and said, "Man, what are you doing?" You got to take appropriate action.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I asked that because I know, as a sort of a different example, the night John Lennon was shot, radio really jumped on top of that and did some really great radio. Did you feel like this situation you were able to do some really great radio, even in a tragic situation like this?
I think we did. I think because the station dedicated itself to the problem at hand, and all the personnel did the same thing. I mean, we had a 2-man news department. They worked. I don't know when they slept. And all the jocks handled themselves very, very well and rationally. And I would get there before sundown, and I wouldn't leave till sun up because I wasn't going to be in the dark.
Right.
To or from. But I think my point there is it was a very, very tight situation.
Yeah.
And we ended up with a lobby full of loot because we said, look, if you've stolen something, if you've rioted and taken something that doesn't belong to you, and you're not feeling very good about this, you can bring it to.
I never knew that. That's amazing.
Yeah, you can bring it to our lobby, no questions asked.
Wow.
Just drop it off here, and that's the end of it.
So you did make a difference.
I think we did because we ended up about waist deep in stuff. And of course, I don't know what we did with it.
Gave it away as prizes on this.
Went to the prize closet, did it?
I really don't know what happened to it. But
that's not funny.
But people did have second thoughts,
right?
Yeah,
and that's the important.
And that's
part.
what happens in situations like that too.
Yeah, yeah. And let me add something. At the very end of it, now it was at the end of it on Crenshaw because it was still going in some other places.
Sure.
But about 3 days, by the third morning or so, people were out with their shovels and their brooms and whatnot, and they were cleaning up around the neighborhood. And you had white people coming in from the valley in vans with their cleaning equipment there to help their neighbors, just as you had black people stepping out from behind their TVs to go rescue non-black people at the beginning of it.
Right.
After watching on television what was happening.
Right.
So people are essentially good.
Yeah.
And that was something that I took from it because good people did good things all around.
Gives you hope, doesn't it?
It does.
Yeah.
It does.
Yeah. Well, with that in mind, last question we ask everybody, state of radio today in your eyes.
Oh, I hate it. And there are bright spots. There is talent. But radio, I'm sorry, when the Telecommunications Act came in with deregulation, it just went right down the pipes as far as I'm concerned. We used to show up to work like gunslingers. It was like, we're here to take everybody out.
Yeah.
And everybody came with...
That's the common thread with a lot of the really good people we've spoken with.
Yeah, well, Lee Marshall brought that up and said, there was a time when, it was us and them, and it was a battle.
And you didn't want to just beat your competition; you wanted to annihilate.
Exactly, and the thing was that you weren't protecting the sister station down the hall.
Right.
Yeah. You didn't protect anybody. You were protecting nobody. You're here to wipe them out. Yeah. And we can't. And of course, everybody came with that attitude. So so it made for great competition, and it made for great promotions. It made for personalities who started off with great stuff, but they would develop themselves because they knew they had to bring it.
Right.
And you had things worked out. We had programming worked out to the nth degree. And what happened was they cut loose the guys who knew what they were doing before they found out what they were doing.
Right.
Okay?
Because it sounded so easy.
It sounded so easy. They didn't understand. Let's say, for example, digital time checks. I know why digital time checks came in the first place. So there was a reason that we gave digital time checks. And I'll tell you, I got it from Bill Drake. Now, he may have gotten it from Ron Jacobs, because I understand Jacobs came up with a lot of stuff. But it was Drake who implemented digital time checks. Yeah. Why? They're shorter.
Yeah.
That's just one example.
That's right.
Yeah.
And there were certain things that we did programmatically that just worked. And it wasn't something that you can fake from listening to it. You know what I mean? I can't become a great musician without studying music and simply by emulating somebody. I mean, there are the people who become great musicians who can't read music, but you have to apply yourself to this thing. You have to find stuff out. You can't just do what you think it is.
Yeah.
And today, I think, in the pros who are left doing it, I think that they experience a certain degree of frustration for the very same reason. But people say, well, would you want to go back on the air? Not as it stands, and for two reasons. A, I'm a scary guy. Like I said earlier, what are you going to do? Scare me? You going to intimidate me? I don't think so. And what are you going to threaten to fire me? Oh, well, I can stand it. But I don't bring attitude, but they don't know that. They see somebody a potential problem. And that's okay, because I don't want to be there anyway. Plus, I don't want to I always worked with guys who were at least on my level in terms of knowing what they were doing. We may not have agreed 100%. Who agrees 100% with anybody? Sure. But we were on the same level. And I don't think that there are many guys who are on my level. And I don't say that because I think I'm so great and wonderful. I think that there's a big club of us out here who are on pretty much the same level, because that's the way we were brought up and brought along. So, no, I don't. It's not the same. However, you know what? Something new will happen. I think it's going to happen on the internet.
Mike and I are planning on winning the lottery and
that'd be
launching
nice.
Our own station.
Would you give me a call?
I will.
Richard, do you find this man scary?
No,
I don't either.
No.
I don't either. And I'll tell you,
but professionalism scares people.
That's true.
And you don't hear a lot of that on radio anymore. It drives me nuts too.
This has been an absolute joy, JJ, to hear the stories and to talk old school radio. I guess again the geek squad's come out again,
right?
But amazing stories, an amazing book for everybody out there. Aircheck Life and Music. Get it on Kindle at Amazon.com.
It's only a few bucks.
Yeah,
and well worth it.
It's well worth it.
Thank you.
Any chance of actually publishing it for old schoolers?
I'm looking to look. This is my first experience as an author,
right?
And I'm still trying to get used to saying I'm an author.
Yeah.
It's my first experience, and I figured, okay, let me put it on Kindle because I know it'll get out. And I've been thinking, you know what? It needs a website. So I just put a website up. And somebody said, you need to be on Twitter. I don't understand Twitter. Well, learn Twitter because you need to do it. So I think that's my next step. And then I think after that, maybe I might start shopping it.
Yeah. He's getting it. He's going to get it.
Yes.
He's absolutely going to get it.
Yeah. Yeah. So,
JJ, got to thank you so much.
Well, Mike, thank you very much.
Spending the time with us.
And Richard, thank you.
Thanks
for writing those nice things about me.
Oh, and they're all true.
All right.
Absolutely.
I like this man.
Come see us again, all right?
I will.
All right. Thank you.